Hey, Osyka Youth Group, Brother Reed here. It was good to see some of you guys at church tonight. Um, we had a meeting afterwards, and for right now, we're still on hold on our regular youth meeting. So I'm gonna keep on doing the videos, and I'll see you guys at church when you come on Sundays and Wednesdays. So if you can be there, please come so we can just get back to seeing each other again and I'll just keep doing the videos until everything is clear for us to start meeting on a regular basis on our Sunday mornings and Wednesday evenings. Um, Also, Vacation Bible School, we talked about that tonight, and that is a go. Well, I say it's a go. We're going to be preparing for it. Um, so that if we're able to do it on our regular time, we'll be able to do it. And if something happens and we can't do it, we'll just have to postpone it or whatever. But we're going to go ahead and be prepared for Vacation Bible School and plan on being there and plan on having Vacation Bible School. But if something happens and we can't, like I say, we'll just deal with that later. Um, so anyway, we're going to continue in First Corinthians. We started First Corinthians last video. Uh, well, I'll say last video. I've done two videos on First Corinthians. We're going to be in chapter 2 this evening, and we'll go on through it and continue on like we're doing until further notice, until we can start meeting again. So chapter 2 of First Corinthians um, is titled Paul's Reliance Upon the Spirit. It says, "And when I came to you, brethren, I did not come with superiority of speech or of wisdom, proclaiming to you the testimony of God, for I determined to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling. And my message and my preaching were not in persuasive words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, so that your faith would not rest on the wisdom of men, but on the power of God. Yet we do Yet we do speak wisdom among those who are mature, a wisdom, however, not of this age, nor of the rulers of this age who are passing away. But we speak God's wisdom in a mystery, the hidden wisdom which God predestined before the ages to our glory. The wisdom which none of the rulers of this age has understood. For if they had understood it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But just as is written, things which eye has not seen, and ear has not heard, and which have not entered the heart of man, all that God has prepared for those who love him. For to us God revealed them through the Spirit, for the Spirit searches all things, even the depths of God. For who among men knows the thoughts of a man except the spirit of the man which is in him? Even so, the thoughts of God no one knows except the Spirit of God. Now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, so that we may know the things freely given to us by God, which things we also speak, not in words taught by human wisdom, but in those taught by the Spirit, combining spiritual thoughts with spiritual words. But a natural man does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him, and he cannot understand them, because they are spiritually appraised. But he who is spiritually appraised, but he who is spiritual appraises all things, yet he himself is appraised by no one. For who has known the mind of the Lord that he will instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ." So Paul, I can relate on a lot of things with Paul. Mainly on this, he says, when I came to you, I didn't come with superiority of speech uh, or of wisdom, proclaiming you the testimony of God, for I determined to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. And he talks about his fear and weakness and all that. I can relate to that because I don't have the education like some people have in ministry, um, and I just rely on God. that has surprised me in situations of the words that have come out of my mouth. One little story I'll tell you is one of my first youth group. I was really lacking in knowledge and wisdom, and the message I gave them that evening was about the question I posed to them was, what would you do for a friend? How far would you go? And I based it on what Christ did for his friends, for the 12 disciples, and how they did things for him. How they would, uh, Peter was bold in his words, but when it came down to it, he was a little shy on that. But um, he did some things for Christ, and especially after he realized the truth of Christ on that. But thinking on that, and that was the thing of how far, would you? And my question else was, would you lie for your friends? Uh, would you steal for your friends? How far do you go? Where's the boundary of your friendship? How far would you go? Not saying that Christ is. Uh, asked his friends to lie for him, anything like that. But you know, the more you care about somebody, the more you'll do for them. But that was the question I asked. How far would you go for a friend? Would you cover for them? How far would you go? In the midst of that message, there was a sisters in my class, and one of them, the older one, came up to me and said that she had to go to the restroom, and I'm like, okay, you know. So she leaves, and I continue on in the message, our discussion, and then the other one comes up, and she was like, I need to go check on my sister. She hadn't come back yet. So I was like, okay. Well, then, I continued on with the message, and this was our evening time. I guess it was either a Sunday evening or a Wednesday evening. I don't remember, but it was evening time. And I didn't pay no attention after that. We finished up and everything, and we had I think it was about 25 kids there in a small room. Um, but anyway, after church, we're going outside, and I'm telling them all bye and this and the other. Well, all of a sudden, I have these two girls' parents come up, and they was like, "Where are?" And I'm not going to say their names. And I was like, and I thought about it. I was like, well, man, I hadn't thinking to myself, I haven't seen them since they went to the bathroom. So I was like, well, I don't know where they're at. So we go to looking around, can't find them, can't find them. Well, long story short, they had left. I don't know if I think the first girl, the older girl, had gone to the bathroom, but whenever the second girl comes out checking on her, then they team up, and they had arranged a meeting with some boys. They met them in the parking lot, and they left. It was supposed to be just their plan was they were going to leave and then be back before service was over with. And they actually drove by while I'm talking to their parents, but we didn't know what actually at the time that they had run off like that. So we go to hunting for them. Next thing you know, the law's involved and all this. And but that was the question was, how far would you go uh, for a friend? And um, I didn't have any wisdom, but after the fact, a girl comes up to me when we're getting worried because we can't find them in the church. We can't. So this girl comes up to me and she says, I know where they're at. And I was like, what are you talking about? She said, they met up with some boys. And I was like, so why are you just not telling me? And she's like, well, that's my friends. I didn't want to get them in trouble. Um, and I said, my first thought is like, wait a minute, you were in the class. Do you remember, did you hear what we were talking about? And her eyes just kind of got big, and she's like, wow, you knew. And I was like, no, I didn't know, but God did, and he was speaking through me. I said, you should have came to me right then and said something. I said, I'm glad you're telling me now. So that's when we got the law involved, because we knew that they had run off with these boys. But that was the wisdom that God was using through me. I wasn't smart enough to figure that out. I had no clue, but God had already prepared. We were talking about that when those girls, before they left, the question was already out there. I'd already asked them, how far would you go for a friend? And not knowing myself, but God in his sovereignty had already planned this all out. So thinking of Paul's in these situations, and that's his thing. Paul was in a sense a religious leader. He was, he gives his uh, details of all his accomplishments in one of his books, and he was, but when it came to Christ, he was clueless, and he didn't have any knowledge of how things worked, but he was just operating on his faith, his spiritual. Uh, the Holy Spirit was in him, and that's all he was relying on, and that's what he says there. He says, "I came to you. I did not come with superiority of speech, and I definitely don't have that, or of wisdom, proclaiming to you the testimony of God." Uh, they had better testimonies than Paul. All Paul had was his experience on the road to Damascus. That's all he had. And he was relying on that because he knew uh, that Christ had done a miracle in his life. And that's what Paul was going around starting out proclaiming, that this Christ that was crucified, he saw him afterwards, because he said he saw Jesus. Jesus asked him, you know, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he saw the face of Christ. So he had that to be a witness to. He goes on and says, for I determined to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. That's all he was standing on, was the connection that he had with these people of knowing Christ and Christ being crucified. He says, I was with you in weakness and in fear and in trembling. I can relate to that. Most of the time when I get in front of anybody, especially in front of the church, or sometimes even with the youth group, I get nervous. I fumble around. Y'all can probably tell I get nervous even in front of the camera. But anyway, he says, and my message and my preaching were not in persuasive words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, so that your faith would not rest on the wisdom of men, but on the power of God. And I'm going to stop there because I read the whole thing, but I think we're going to talk more about it a little bit more on Sunday, maybe. But that, what he's saying there, that so that your faith would not rest on the wisdom of men, but on the power of God. I don't know if you guys have ever been somewhere and actually seen God's, and you may be saying, whenever I say this, you may kind of think I'm falling off the deep end or gone crazy or something, but I have been in situations before, and I know God's presence was there. I know His hand of protection was there, just because of the peace in the midst of that storm. Um, I remember one of the things, and this is just a little testimony. I remember when I first got in church, and I was called into the ministry, duh, and I remember praying to God, just asking for guidance, asking for courage, all those things, because I was not prepared to be in front of people. I was not. I'm still not comfortable, and I thank God for that, because I rely on Him every time I get in front of anybody. But anyway, I remember praying to Him, and I've got my eyes closed, and I'm praying, and all of a sudden, with my eyes closed, I see this almost like a face. I couldn't. It's hard to explain. I could see the outline. I could see some of the facial features, some of the things, and it was just a peace that came over me that He was going to take care of me. He was going to meet my needs of strength and courage. He was going to give me what I need. Not everything I wanted in that. I mean, I would love to just be able to be more bold and all that and be comfortable doing what I do. But also on the backside of that is I'm thankful that I'm not comfortable, because every time I'm praying for strength, I'm praying for courage, I'm asking for His help, I'm asking Him to use me and to 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 just take over, because I'm not strong enough to do it. Um, so when I read Paul's message here, it reminds me of me. Um, It says, so that your faith would not rest on the wisdom of men, but on the power of God. That is my reading. That is me. I don't want people listening to me and saying, "Oh, well, he's this or he's that," thinking that, and they're not. They're not going to think I'm a smart person by the if they around me. They're going to realize I'm not. So that I know that they see, or if they hear a message from me and it touches them, it's not me. And that's, I believe, what Paul was making a comment about, was everything that Paul did was relying on Christ. That courage, that strength, the people that came to know Christ through Paul, Paul gives Christ the credit. It was nothing that Paul did, because he's not worthy. Every time, at the beginning of just about every one of his books, he considers himself a bond slave, a servant. He's not, proclaiming to be somebody special. He goes throughout all of his books pointing back to Christ, and we talked about this in a previous message. He kept pointing back to Christ, kept pointing back to Christ. So, like I say, I can relate to Paul. I'm thankful that uh, for a lot of things that's happened in my life in the ministry. Early on in my ministry, I saw that the church can be the hardest people to speak to, uh, not just uh, intimidation wise, but uh, they're the hardest ones to reach at times, because they've heard the messages before, and uh, but it's all going back to what the Bible says, that no one comes to the Father except the ones that are drawn by the Spirit. So um, that's the main focus of Paul's message, and at times is letting people know that he's not the one to be worshipped. He's not the one to be looked up to. He's just a normal old person, normal Joe, I guess you would call it. He doesn't have all the uh, diplomas. He doesn't have, I mean, the ones he does have, all of the stuff that he does has, he says he counts those as manure or rubbish, uh, because it was pretty much a waste, because it was all wrong compared to Christ. So, like I say, when I read this section, I think a lot of my past. Um, Also, thinking of that, where it says the power of God. One of the things I remember reading when I first got into the ministry was where Jesus said that, he had done all these miracles at the time, and he tells the disciples that they would go on and do greater things than that. And I'm thinking, man, how do you do greater things than healing people and opening the blind's eyes and healing the lame and all these things? But what I've come to realize in ministry, and I can actually maybe not name off names, but I have seen in uh, the times I've preached, the times I've been with youth groups, I have actually seen eyes being opened. Not that they were blind, physically blind, but spiritually. They were clueless, and it goes on into this where the in that last part, the natural man does not accept the things of the spirit, and he compares those. And so, like I say, I've seen eyes opened. I've seen the dead come to life, which, like I say, they're not physically dead, but spiritually dead. And because of God's power and words that He allowed me to speak, they were their lives were changed, and they were new. They were alive in Christ. So that's the things, guys, that we have to remember. Sometimes the Bible, I've never seen a dead person, a physically dead person, come to life. I've never seen that. I'm not saying it don't happen, but what I have seen is spiritually dead people being born again and come to life. I've seen spiritually blind people eyes opened to the truth and come to life. I've seen people, uh, when it talks about the mute, I've seen people like me that are very shy about speaking out in crowds and in public and in ministry or whatever. I've seen people like that, and all of a sudden they have this power of God that goes through them, and then all of a sudden they're like me. They're in front of people, and I don't know. I think I may have mentioned it to most of you guys, but when I was in school, I wouldn't even get in front of the class to read a paper or anything. If that was part of the grade, I would take a failing grade. I would write the paper. I would do the work. But if the teacher would say, okay, call on somebody and stand up and read your paper, I wouldn't do it. And they would say, well, I'm going to give you a failing grade, and I'm not getting in front of nobody. But God has changed me to where I still don't, at times I'm not comfortable, but with His strength, I get in front of people, and I will stand in front of people and I will preach. I'm very, very nervous when I get up there, but usually once God really takes over, I'm okay, and I forget about that. The nervousness is gone. But I think He allows that just so that I will depend on Him. Because if I didn't need Him for strength, then I wouldn't ask Him for strength. Uh, I wouldn't be like that. I would just get in front of people and it just come naturally. But I'm so thankful that He keeps me humble in those situations. Uh, so, like I say, this part, and that's I'm looking at my clock there. That's probably about all I'm going to talk about on this little section here. We may pick up a little bit more of that in Sunday morning's message. I may uh, uh, go back over some of that stuff, but guys, it's okay. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to be uh, uh, humble. It's very good to be, that have that kind of personality, because uh, God says that He will use the humble to shame the wise, and the bold, the people that are shy. I mean, He's gonna use that. He loves to take somebody out of their comfort zone. That's the main thing, guys. If you're comfortable doing something, you don't rely on God. He wants you to be doing something you're not comfortable doing, so that all the honor and glory goes to Him, because He's the one that uses me. He's the one that gets me in front of this camera. He's the one that gets me in front of the church. He's the one that gets me in front of anybody talking about anything outside of glass or whatever. If it's Christian based, I am relying on Him for everything, because I'm not comfortable. That's why people, I don't really like to quote scripture in a sense. Some people can just spout it out, but uh, I mean, I may have mentioned different ones, but most of the time, because I'm fearful of getting it wrong, I'm not confident in that I will. I've got them highlighted in my Bible, and I'll go back and I know where it's at. Let me read it to you, just because of that. So now, I'm not saying anything against anybody that can do that. I just can't. I'm not comfortable, and I don't want to get it wrong. I don't have the mental capacity. I can't remember that much to get it right. So that being said, um, God will give you the strength. He will give you the courage. I can testify to it multiple times. I can testify to healings. I can testify to His hand of protection. I can tell you stories upon stories of in my own life, in other people's lives that I know is fact. But the main ones that I will really share is the ones that He's done in my life, because I know I know what He's done in my life, and there's nobody going to take that away from me. That is the precious gift of your testimony, is that it is for you to show God's power and God's grace and God's mercy and God's love. That's why you have the testimony. The good stuff and the bad. That is your testimony. So don't be afraid to share it. It will touch someone's life. It's not just for you. Um, it is to be shared to encourage one another. So, guys, that is Wednesday night's message. I know it's late getting it on here. I forgot about it last night. I gotta get back on the ball of doing it the day before I can put it on here. But I got sidetracked yesterday, and then we had church this evening. I didn't even attempt to do it at the shop because it still wouldn't be on there. So anyway, that's this evening's message. And guys, I hope you stay safe, stay focused. That's the main thing, guys. The newsletter, I sent the message to Miss Dorinda for the newsletter, and that is the main uh, deal of, I believe, this year, 2020. 2020 is not an accident that is 2020, and we have all these distractions because we need to stay focused. All right, guys, talk to you on the next one.